She had no idea who she was about to humiliate. Maya had always been opinionated, never afraid to speak her mind, especially when it came to the ultra-rich. To her, billionaires lived in a bubble, blind to the struggles of ordinary people. She had spent countless hours debating their greed, rolling her eyes at their excess, and voicing her frustration online. But tonight, she wasn't behind a screen. Tonight, she was face to face with one. And she didn't even realize it. The restaurant was a sanctuary for the elite, low-lit, refined, and expensive enough to keep out the average diner. Soft jazz hummed in the background, waiters moved with silent precision, and the air smelled of aged wine and truffle-infused dishes. Every detail whispered exclusivity. Maya moved through the tables, her confidence effortless. She knew how to handle these people. Play nice, keep it professional, and keep her thoughts to herself. But that was before he walked in. Dressed in a wrinkled t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days, he looked out of place, almost lost. At first, she dismissed him. Then, the hostess spoke his name. Elon Musk. Maya had just stepped into a conversation she would never forget. Maya watched as the hostess led him to a corner table near the window. There was no hesitation in his steps, no uncertainty. He moved as if he belonged, though everything about him clashed with the restaurant's usual clientele. His t-shirt had slight wrinkles, his jeans were ordinary, and his sneakers had visible creases. If she hadn't heard his name, she would have assumed he was lost. She grabbed a menu and took a deep breath. Her job was simple: serve, smile, move on. But something about this felt different. As she reached his table, she forced a polite expression. "Good evening," she said, setting the menu in front of him. "Would you like any recommendations, or do you already know what you want?" Elon barely glanced at the menu. "I'll start with sparkling water. And I'll go with the chef special." Maya raised a brow. "You trust the chef that much?" A faint smirk crossed his lips. "I like seeing what people come up with when they have full creative control." She pressed her lips together. The response was so casual, as if dropping hundreds of dollars on a meal was no different than picking up a coffee. She had spent years reading about billionaires like him, men who sat on unimaginable wealth while regular people struggled. Now, one was sitting right in front of her, acting as if this was just another meal. "Must be nice," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon leaned back slightly. "Sorry." Maya straightened, pretending to adjust her apron. "I just mean, it must be nice not having to check prices before ordering." There was a pause, the kind that stretched just a little too long. Elon didn't look offended. If anything, he looked mildly entertained. "You think that's what money does?" he asked. Maya shrugged, feigning indifference. "When you have enough of it, the world starts looking a little different." A couple of nearby guests stole quick glances in their direction. Not outright staring, but listening. Conversations in a place like this were usually quiet, filled with meaningless chatter about investments and luxury vacations. A waitress openly making digs at a billionaire wasn't something people saw every day. Elon studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod, as if tucking away her words for later. "Maybe," he said simply. Maya exhaled, gripping the edge of her notepad. She had expected him to brush her off or get defensive. Instead, he remained calm. She turned on her heel and walked toward the service station, jaw clenched. A familiar rush of adrenaline coursed through her. She always spoke her mind. It was what set her apart. But something about the way he had looked at her, so unreadable, made her uneasy. Jason, one of her co-workers, was stacking plates nearby. He had caught part of the exchange and shot her a glance. "Careful," he muttered under his breath. "That guy could probably buy the whole block just for fun." Maya let out a dry laugh. "Maybe he already has." She turned back toward his table just as his meal arrived. The dish had been plated with perfection, the chef ensuring every detail was right. Normally, guests took a bite and marveled at the flavors. Elon, however, barely reacted. He chewed slowly, swallowed, then gave a small nod. Maya approached again, keeping her tone professional. How is everything? He set down his fork. It's good. That was it. No excitement. No compliments. Just good. Maya pressed her lips together. Glad to hear it. She was about to step away when he spoke again. You don't like me very much, do you? The words caught her off guard. He wasn't angry. His tone was light, almost amused. Maya stiffened. Customers usually ignored her comments or brushed them off. This was different. He had noticed. She kept her expression neutral. I don't have an opinion. Elon chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, you definitely do. Something about the way he said it, so certain, made irritation rise in her chest. You know, she said, tilting her head slightly, I just think it's interesting how billionaires love to talk about the future but never seem to care about the people struggling right now. Elon didn't react immediately. He took another bite, swallowed, then looked at her again. What makes you think I don't care? Maya scoffed. I don't know. Maybe because people are working 3 jobs just to afford rent, while guys like you are flying rockets into space. A few nearby guests subtly adjusted their posture. They were still pretending not to listen, but now they were fully invested. Jason, watching from across the room, widened his eyes. He mouthed, What are you doing? Maya ignored him. Elon leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. His expression remained neutral, but there was something sharp in his gaze. Do you drive a car? He asked. Maya blinked, caught off guard. What? A car? He repeated. Do you own one? She hesitated. Yeah. Gas or electric? Gas. Elon shrugged. Then you funded my competition. Maya frowned. What's your point? My point, he said, is that it's easy to criticize from a distance. But when you step into the real world, things get complicated. Maya folded her arms. So what? That means no one's allowed to question you. Not at all, he said smoothly. I welcome it. But if you're going to challenge me, at least make sure your own hands are clean. A strange unease settled in her stomach. For the first time since the conversation started, Maya felt like she was the one on the defensive. And Elon knew it. Maya held her ground, arms crossed, watching Elon with narrowed eyes. He had flipped the conversation so effortlessly, turning her own words against her without even raising his voice. It annoyed her. No, it infuriated her. Right, she said, forcing a dry laugh. So, because I drive a gas car, that means I can't question how billionaires run the world. Elon tilted his head slightly. I never said that. But it's interesting, isn't it? People criticize from a distance, but when given a choice, they still support the system they claim to hate. Her jaw tightened. That's not the same thing. Regular people don't have the luxury of picking and choosing their morals. Some of us have to make decisions based on what we can afford, not what aligns with some billionaire's vision of the future. Elon nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Fair point, he said, his tone still unreadable. Maya expected him to push back, maybe defend himself, but he didn't. He simply listened. It unsettled her more than if he had snapped back. She glanced around the restaurant. A few guests were now openly watching. The ones who weren't had the same careful stillness as before, pretending not to notice but clearly listening. Even some of her co-workers were eyeing her from across the room. Jason looked like he was trying to blend into the walls. Maya turned her focus back to Elon, unwilling to let the moment slip. You know what bothers me? She said, voice firm. Guys like you talk about innovation, progress, making the world better. But when it comes to the people actually struggling right now, suddenly it's too complicated. You have all this money, all this power, but normal people are still drowning while you fly off into space. A flicker of something crossed Elon's face. Amusement, maybe curiosity, but not anger. Let me ask you something, he said, resting his arms on the table. How much do you think I had when I started? Maya rolled her eyes. Oh, let me guess. The classic self-made billionaire speech? You worked hard, built everything from scratch, no help at all. Elon didn't flinch. Not nothing, he admitted. But not as much as you think. Doesn't change where you are now, she shot back. At the top, while the rest of us scrape by. Elon leaned back, considering her words. And you? He asked. What do you want to do with your life? The question caught her off guard. What? What do you want? He repeated. You clearly have strong opinions about the world. What are you doing with them? Maya hesitated. She stopped herself, gripping the notepad in her hands. That's not the point. Isn't it? Elon asked. It's easy to point fingers, to say what's wrong. But what are you actually doing to fix it? She scoffed. Oh, right. Because it's that simple. Just wake up one morning and fix the system. It's not simple, he agreed. But neither is running a business. Neither is creating something new. Neither is making change happen. Maya clenched her jaw, feeling the weight of the conversation shift. It had started with her in control, calling him out. Now, somehow, she was the one feeling cornered. Elon took a sip of his water, then set the glass down with a soft clink. You want people like me to care, he said. But if I told you I did, you wouldn't believe me. Maya exhaled sharply, because saying it isn't enough. Then what is? He asked. The words hung in the air. She wanted to fire back, to say something sharp, but nothing came. The truth was, she didn't know. She glanced over her shoulder. The manager was watching now, his expression unreadable. Jason looked like he was bracing for impact. Maya turned back to Elon, pulse quickening. She had spent years believing men like him were the problem. She had been so sure. But now, for the first time, she wasn't sure of anything at all. And the worst part? Elon could see it. Maya folded her arms, eyes narrowing. She had started this conversation feeling confident, in control. Now, that control was slipping. You're twisting my words, she said, her voice sharper than before. Elon didn't argue. He simply watched her, expression unreadable. You say I should fix things, she continued, frustration bubbling up. Like it's that easy. Like people like me even get the chance. Elon tilted his head slightly. What do you mean by people like you? Maya scoffed. Workers. Regular people. We don't have billions to throw at problems. We don't have teams of advisors or connections. We're just trying to survive while people like you sit back and collect wealth. A flicker of something crossed Elon's face. Not irritation. Not amusement. Something more like curiosity. You think that's what I do? He asked. Maya gestured around the restaurant. You're sitting in one of the most expensive places in the city, ordering a meal that costs more than most people's rent. Do you really think that looks like you care? Elon didn't flinch. What does caring look like? Maya opened her mouth, then shut it. She hadn't expected the question. You think if I gave away all my money, everything would be fixed? He pressed. Not all of it, she muttered. But more. Enough to actually make a difference. Elon exhaled slowly, then leaned forward. Do you know how much money has been poured into charity? Into aid? Into government programs? Maya stiffened. That's different. Is it? His voice remained calm. If throwing money at a problem worked, wouldn't we have solved poverty by now? She frowned. So what, then? Just do nothing? Elon shook his head. No, but I build things. I invest in new ideas. I try to solve problems from the ground up. Maya let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, by sending cars into space instead of helping people here on Earth. Elon smirked. You ever think about why I do that? Maya rolled her eyes. To show off. His smirk didn't fade. Or maybe because technology today builds the future tomorrow. She exhaled, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down. That's a nice way to justify it, she muttered. Elon tapped his fingers against the table. Tell me, when was the last time you actually tried to change something? Maya's jaw tightened. I call things out when they're wrong. That's not change, Elon said smoothly. That's complaining. Heat rose in her chest. Oh, so I'm just supposed to accept things as they are? No, he said, shaking his head. You're supposed to do something about them. Maya inhaled sharply, her grip tightening on the notepad. The guests nearby weren't even pretending to ignore them anymore. A couple at a corner table had turned slightly, pretending to adjust their napkins while they listened. At the service station, Jason looked pale. The manager had stepped out from behind the bar, arms crossed, watching closely. Maya felt a pang of unease. She had started this conversation believing she was making a point. Now, she wasn't so sure. Elon sat back, studying her. You know, he said, voice even, I once hired a guy who spent years trashing me online. Maya frowned. What? He wrote blog after blog about how I was ruining the world, Elon continued. But he didn't just complain. He had ideas. Real solutions. So instead of arguing with him, I hired him. Maya swallowed. Why? Because it's easy to point out problems, Elon said. It's harder to fix them. She felt her pulse in her ears. Elon leaned forward slightly. So tell me, Maya, he said, voice low but firm. Are you here to argue? Or do you actually want to change something? She had no answer. And for the first time that night, she felt small. Maya let out a dry chuckle, shaking her head. You really think you care, don't you? Her voice carried a sharp edge now, frustration bubbling over. You billionaires always act like you're doing the world a favor, throwing around big words about progress, innovation. She gestured vaguely. But at the end of the day, it's just about making sure people keep seeing you as the hero. The air in the restaurant thickened. A few guests subtly turned their heads. Others, while pretending to focus on their meals, had slowed their movements. The quiet hum of conversation had faded into a heavy silence. Elon remained seated, completely unfazed. His eyes studied her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry. He wasn't amused. He was simply watching. Maya felt her heartbeat quicken, but she didn't stop. People like me? We don't have PR teams spinning every move to make us look good. We don't have millions to throw at problems just to look generous. We just have to survive. Elon leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. His voice, steady and calm, cut through the air. So, what do you want? The question caught her off guard. What? You've spent the last 10 minutes telling me what's wrong, he said. So tell me, what's the solution? Maya opened her mouth, but no words came. She hadn't expected the question. She had expected him to defend himself, maybe argue back. Instead, he had flipped it on her. You want me to do more? Elon continued. Fine. But more of what? What's the fix? What would actually make a difference? She frowned, feeling the weight of his words press against her chest. She hesitated, gripping the edge of her notepad. I don't know, but I know throwing money at things isn't enough. Elon nodded slowly, his gaze still locked on her. That's what I thought. For the first time, she felt something shift. The certainty she had walked into this conversation with was slipping away, replaced by something else. Doubt. She wanted to say something, anything, to regain control. But before she could, she heard a voice behind her. Maya. She turned. The restaurant manager stood near the bar, arms crossed, his face tight with forced composure. Jason, standing just a few feet away, looked anywhere but at her. Step over here for a second, the manager said. His tone was even, but it wasn't a request. Maya swallowed, a strange unease creeping into her stomach. Slowly, she turned back to Elon, half expecting him to smirk, to say something cutting. But he just sat there, watching. She turned on her heel and walked toward the back hallway, where the manager waited. As soon as they were away from the dining floor, he let out a slow breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. Do you have any idea what you just did? He asked, voice low but firm. Maya crossed her arms. I was talking to a customer. The manager let out a humorless chuckle. A customer. He glanced toward the dining room, then back at her. Maya, do you know who that is? She scoffed. Yeah, Elon Musk. The world's richest man. Not exactly a secret. The manager's jaw tightened. No, Maya. He owns this place. Maya blinked. The words didn't register at first. What? The manager exhaled sharply. This restaurant. The one you've been working at for 6 months? It's one of his. Her stomach twisted. He didn't just walk in as some guest, the manager continued. You didn't just argue with a billionaire. You argued with your boss. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She turned slightly, glancing back toward the dining room. Elon was still seated, calm as ever, finishing the last sip of his sparkling water. He knew. He had let her go on, digging herself deeper, and he hadn't said a word. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She swallowed hard. He didn't seem mad. The manager gave her a sharp look. Yeah? Then why does he want to speak with you before he leaves? Maya's breath hitched. What? He asked for you, the manager said, his expression unreadable. Said he wanted a word before he heads out. The air felt heavy around her. She thought back to every sharp remark she had thrown at him, every assumption she had made, every way she had tried to put him in his place. Her hands felt clammy. If she lost this job, she was done. Rent was already tight, and places like this didn't give second chances. She took a shaky breath. Okay, she said finally. I'll talk to him. The manager studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. Maya squared her shoulders, pushed down the sinking feeling in her chest, and walked back toward the dining room. With every step, the weight of what was coming pressed down on her. Maya stepped back onto the restaurant floor, feeling every pair of eyes on her. The weight of what had just happened pressed against her chest, but she forced herself to move. Her hands felt unsteady as she walked toward the table where Elon Musk still sat, completely at ease, as if the heated conversation had never happened. Jason was at the service station, avoiding eye contact. A few other staff members whispered among themselves, pretending to be busy but clearly paying attention. The manager stood near the bar, arms crossed, watching closely. Maya swallowed hard. She stopped just in front of the table, forcing herself to meet Elon's gaze. You wanted to talk? She asked, keeping her voice even. Elon set his glass down gently. I did. Maya took a slow breath, bracing herself. If you're gonna fire me, just say it. Elon leaned back, studying her. His expression didn't hold anger or amusement, just something unreadable. You think I'd fire you for disagreeing with me? Maya hesitated. I mean, yeah. A small smirk flickered at the corner of his mouth. If I fired everyone who challenged me, I'd be running my companies alone. Her fingers tightened around her notepad. Then what is this? Elon exhaled, folding his hands in front of him. The problem isn't that you have opinions. The problem is that you assume too much. Maya blinked. Excuse me. You assumed I don't care. You assumed I never struggled. You assumed I sit back and do nothing while people suffer, he said, voice calm but firm. And I let you assume, because I wanted to see if you'd ever stop to consider that you might be wrong. A lump formed in her throat, but she pushed past it. I never said you do nothing. You implied it, Elon replied. And maybe that's the real issue. You're so used to blaming people like me that you never stop to ask the right questions. Maya clenched her jaw, feeling her frustration return. I don't need to ask. I see it everywhere. People struggling, working long hours, barely getting by. And yet, here you are, Elon interrupted smoothly. Working in a high-end restaurant, surrounded by wealth every day, serving meals that cost more than some people's rent. And you think I'm the problem? Maya felt a sharp sting in her chest. Elon let the silence linger for a moment before tapping his fingers lightly against the table. Let me ask you something. What do you want to do with your life? Maya frowned. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, he said simply. You clearly have strong opinions. You care about something. So, what are you doing with it? Maya opened her mouth but hesitated. Are you starting something? Building something? Helping someone? Elon pressed. Or are you just standing here, arguing with a guy at a dinner table because it makes you feel like you're doing something? The words hit harder than she expected. Elon reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card, and slid it across the table. I have a foundation that funds people with ideas, he said. People who want to change things instead of just talking about it. Maya stared at the card but didn't pick it up. If you ever stop being angry long enough to build something, give me a call, Elon said. She felt her heart pounding in her ears. Her hands remained at her sides, but she didn't move. Elon stood, adjusting his jacket. As he reached for his keys, he looked at her one last time. Oh, and one more thing, he added casually. Maya braced herself. What? He smirked. The short rib could have used more seasoning. And with that, he walked toward the exit, leaving Maya standing there, staring at the card in front of her, feeling something she hadn't expected. Doubt. Maya stood frozen, staring at the small card resting on the table. The restaurant bustled around her, waiters moving quickly, guests returning to their quiet conversations, but she barely heard any of it. Her fingers twitched at her sides, her mind replaying the last few minutes. For months, she had been certain of one thing: billionaires were the problem. They hoarded wealth, ignored real struggles, and only cared about their own success. But now, for the first time, doubt crept in. She picked up the card, turning it over between her fingers. The name was printed in clean, simple letters, followed by contact details. No flashy logos, no extravagant titles. Just an offer. Jason passed by, hesitating for a second. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Maya didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure how to. Did he fire you? She shook her head. No. Jason let out a breath of relief. Wow, that was intense. Maya nodded, still lost in thought. She had walked into this thinking she was making a statement, proving a point. Instead, she had been forced to question everything she believed. Could she really call out problems if she wasn't doing anything to fix them? She exhaled sharply and slid the card into her apron pocket. She didn't know if she would ever use it, but one thing was clear. Elon Musk wasn't the one walking away with second thoughts. She was.